righty. My name is Scott Swazey. Can you guys in the back hear me? Raise your hand if you can hear me in the back. Anyone? All right, looks good. All right. I'm going to be talking about the Lunar Lander GT40. I'm a fast talker. I apologize for that. It is being recorded. It'll be on the VCF SoCal website at some point. It's also on mytattlersolutions.com. I did another presentation. It's also online. So all the information you can get to, and there are links to some of the stuff we talk about that I'll talk about today. So it's not quite the 50th anniversary now. It's the 51st anniversary. When I started this talk last year, I spent about 6 months trying to restore this machine. And this talk is about that effort and a little bit of the history behind Lunar Lander. So when I was a kid, it was very memorable to me. Apollo 11 landed on the moon on July 20th, 1969. And then very shortly after that, somebody came up with a text game that basically looked at the lander coming down and how much fuel was left and how much thrust you could apply. And he wrote it in FoCal. And in the fall of 1969, and he was a high school student, and so then later years it was ported to BASIC, and for those who know the Dave All basic computer games books, it was ported to that, and and that's how I found out about it, Lunar Lander, in that book, and so the game was pretty simple. It just was text based, and the computers died, and so you have to do it manually. And you're basically giving the amount of fuel you want to burn at that moment. And the idea is to reduce your speed so you don't crash into the moon. So it's text-based. So it was, I guess, probably a pretty popular program because of all the moon landings and all that was going on in that time period. At the same time, DEC was working on putting out a graphic terminal for its mini computer line. Very, very popular PDP-11 series. But it didn't have any sort of graphic terminals. And so they came up with the idea to do this graphic hardware, and they would pair it with a pair it with a PDP-1105 and create this graphic terminal. It was introduced in October of 1972, about $11,000, so that's roughly $80K today. It had a whopping 8 KB of core memory. And some of the novel features, it had a light pen, which was an easy way to kind of interact with the data that was on the screen. And, but it was generally designed not to be a standalone, although it could do that because it had a PDP-1110, but to talk to a bigger PDP-1145 or 1170 that would do all the number crunching, and then it would just display the results. So they released this in October of 1972. And that was the DEC GT40 terminal. And this is a picture from some of the literature that was available. And then a few months after that, a DEC engineer was commissioned to create a program that would highlight the features of this graphic terminal. For example, it could do italic text. It could highlight. It could draw lines. It was a vector-based display, but it could draw lines that were dashed and dotted for the CAD-CAM kind of applications. And so it had a number of features. And so this software programmer, Jack Burness, basically tried to do as many of the features of this graphic terminal in this game, Lunar Lander. And he called it Moon Lander, I guess. And it turns out that he did it in 10 days. So he really got it out quickly. And it became kind of a huge success. I have friends who played it at Berkeley or whatever, but wherever this terminal was deployed, typically it was running Lunar Lander at some point. And and so it significantly advanced the game. So instead of just managing the amount of thrust or the amount of fuel you were going to burn to land, now you had to deal with rotational of the lander. Was it rotated correctit? Was it moving too much left to right? So you could come down, but if you're moving too fast, you're still going to crash. So he added all that stuff on there. And it had the physics of the game. And so at any rate, and as I said before, it used all the capabilities of this terminal so that so people could see what it was capable of. So this is, believe it or not, this is a picture from VCF East, I think, back in 2000, early 2000s, I think, of this exact computer that I have when it was owned by a different owner, and playing Lunar Lander at a VCF show. And I don't know if you guys got to play it, but it's out there and it's still running, which is great. And you can play it with the light pen, so definitely try it after the talk. And this is some of the literature. Here's an engineer or person using the light pen to slide up and down the thrust slider, or in the next slide, they're using the light pen to rotate with the arrows the orientation of the lander. In 1979, so 1972, this was brought out. November 1973, Lunar Lander was shown, and then 6 years later, Atari basically copied this. And I realized after looking to some of this later in the talk that Atari actually verbatim copied the hardware of the vector machine, the vector engine, and they just put a cheaper CPU. They used smaller memory. They used cheaper ROM, not core memory, and they used an analog pot for the thruster and got rid of the light pen, and then buttons for left and right. So they literally copied the game and then added quarters and made it into a very successful video game that you could play. And this is the cabinet, and this is the thing in the center is that handle where you would apply that to the amount of thrust that you were going to apply to the lander. So that's kind of the history of Lunar Lander and the Atari game that copied it. And so fast forward to just last year, a couple years ago, the restoration. So I have a friend in the Bay Area who acquired this GT40, but it wasn't working and it had some issues. And so here's how it looked. You saw the picture of how it looked at VCF East many, many years ago. Here's how it looks today, or a year ago. It had screen rot, and if you don't know what that is, I'll get to that in a second. But and it also didn't work. It wasn't running. And but the biggest problem right away was screen rot, which is before we had safety glass in CRT tubes, they'd have the CRT tube itself, and they would put this plastic kind of glue that was clear in front of it, and they put a sheet of glass on top of that. So if the tube exploded, all the shards would get trapped in that plastic. And that was all well and good, and it worked fantastically well, and it protected people. It just wasn't good for 50 years. So after 30, 40, 50 years, moisture gets in, and which isn't necessarily a problem. It still works. But eventually that moisture molds. And that's what you see on the screen is mold gets in there, and then it becomes opaque, and it's destroyed the CRT. So my first job, two of us were working on it. My job was going to be fix the monitor, and he was going to fix the computer. So first thing you do is you remove the CRT, and then you scour the internet for this $100 a bottle thing called Discone NC9. And because there's silicone in there, you can't use solvents like acetone or turpentine or anything to dilute it or solve it. You have to actually eat it and digest it. And so I found this stuff, and it's super like toxic, and just getting it shipped was kind of like, it was going to cost me something like $500 because I had to buy 4 bottles. Oh, it was going to cost, and then it was like $100 to ship. So I was going to spend $600 on this. Fortunately, I found somebody who probably illegally shipped it to me for $79 brand new in regular mail. In regular mail. So that's not legit, So anyway, fine with me. $79 later, I had this stuff. And I used hypodermic needles to squirt it into the silicone. And over the course of squirting it in, letting it kind of run out, over the course of about a week, all the silicone was digested, and I was able to pop it out. I should have taken a picture of the PVA plastic stuff in the middle. I didn't. But anyway, these are all the pieces all cleaned up. And I'm thinking, this was not too bad, a week. I've all heard the horror stories of solving screen rot and all that stuff. I'm thinking, no problem, I'll be done. My part will be done soon, and I'm out. Well, it wasn't quite that simple because I had to replace the PVA with something else, and you need an implosion screen. And the guys at Rhode Island Computer Museum did the same thing. And what they did is they just melted a piece of Lexan to the curve of the screen, and they just put it in between and put it all back together. I'm like, hey, that sounds easy. Well, it really wasn't. So I put it in there, and I cooked it too long, and it bubbled, and that didn't work. And wow, I don't have any other pictures. And I tried like putting oils in there, and so it took like 5 or 6 of these at $11 a pop. So I think I went through maybe $110 worth of these plastic sheets trying to get them to melt right, and I finally got it back together. And so now the tube has been reassembled, re-glued together, and it's back in the monitor, but I haven't even tried it out. And I was very fortunate that I put in a sine wave in both X and Y, and I got a diagonal line, because this is a vector monitor. And so the voltage sets where the beam is. So X and Y, if it's the same, they're going to travel together, right, or a diagonal. anyway, so it worked great. So now the next step was, let's get the computer working. Of course, it didn't work. And at that time, it was it was right before California Extreme. For those who don't know, California Extreme is kind of the arcade version of this exact thing, where instead of everybody bringing their computers, they're bringing their pinball machines and arcade games up to the Santa Clara Convention Center at the end of July to basically, share it with everybody. And so same thing, you play all these vintage arcade games and pinballs. And so I wanted to show this there because Lunar Lander is a big part of the arcade, industry as it grew up. And so we were frantically working. We had a couple of days left, and the monitor was working, and we thought we could get the computer working, and Fritz was working on it. And lo and behold, COVID. And so Fritz was out. And so, so this is a week before the show. And so he's working on it frantically, but he just feels terrible. So we lose a couple of days. Now he's back at it, and so it's great, and lo and behold, we were able to get text out of it. This, you can't read it, but it says, "This is a very good sign." And we're thinking, okay, great. So we can do text. Well, okay, can we draw a box? All right, we can draw a box. And so now it's Friday. Of course, it's Friday right before the show on Saturday, Sunday, just like this. And, I say to Fritz, hey, do I need to go to the parts store and buy anything? Because the parts stores have all gone out of business or been gentrified out. And so the one place, Anchor Electronics, is only open during the week. It's not open on Saturday, Sunday. And I say, hey, should I go there? Is there anything we need to know? No, we're going to be fine. So then, great, that's fine. So 4 o'clock passes when they close, and at 6 o'clock, we had a prom failure. I'm like, oh. And they don't have all the proms, but they had this prom. So we're dead in the water. So I had to go to California Extreme, and this is a slide I put up at the end of that presentation because I couldn't show the game because it wasn't running. So next year in 2024, I expect to show what you guys get to see, which is a working GT40, and you can play it and all that stuff, but I didn't have it then. So dismal fail, still did a talk. So the new goal. All right, we got VCF Midwest, which for those of you who have not been to that show, it is a wonderful show. It's huge, and it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, just like this, and it's just massive, and there's all kinds of stuff that comes out. So definitely worth the trip to Chicago to see it. So I'm like, okay, let's get Lunar Lander running for that. So unfortunately, Fritz works for SLIC, Slack, in Stanford, and they're building a big telescope down in South America. And so he is basically down there now all the time. So he's not helping other than, just talking about it. So I take on the role of fixing the GT40 PDP-11. So now it's just a PDP-11 that needs to be fixed. And I've fixed other things, but I've never fixed a PDP-11. So he gave me all the tools, and we can microstep the code and go through all this stuff. And he had found this dead prom. And so now it was our job to figure out, and we didn't have any of the source code in electronic form. We had it in these, BitSaver documentation files from DEC, the GT40 manual. And so, at any rate, so let's program the prompt. So we had to manually look at those ones and zeros and the addresses in octal and type them in. And Fritz is got a great attention to detail. He's very detail-oriented. I am not. And so he was going to take on this task. And my history is I worked for 18 years for Qualcomm in San Diego, and then came up and worked for Tesla for 5 years and ran all of testing and engineering for those groups. And for Tesla, all the parts, all the stuff, ran all that test engineering. And so my team and the people that work for me, I had a rule, and rule number one was don't trust anybody. And it sounds really negative, but it really isn't. It's just like, if it's going to be to you or you're going to deal with it, you just need to make sure you can say, I know it's right. So if you hand it off to someone else, even though I trust Fritz, I know he does good work, I'm just going to double check it. And so sure enough, I checked it, and the prompts, he had transposed one of the digits, And so having a dead prom, nothing works. But if you transpose a digit, you've introduced a bug so subtle that it's going to take you forever to find it. So fortunately, I checked it, and lo and behold, I found the bug, and I fixed it. And so we were back. Everything's running. I can say, this is a very good sign. Okay, so at any rate, so that's working. So let's load a diagnostic, right? Okay, and so there's a great website, which I list in there, and you can find, about GT40, brouhaha.com. Eric did that because he had this exact GT40. So he had all these diagnostics. I'm thinking, great, let's load a diagnostic, you know. So I bring it up there, and it just aborts and crash. And I'm like, well, how am I going to fix this? Because it kind of runs a little bit, and then it dies. And I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to fix this. But fortunately, there was another bug that if I would hit a line feed character, go to line 2, it would hang. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how to fix the diagnostic thing, but I can fix the line feed bug. So lo and behold, I stepped through with this little board that Digital Equipment Corporation made for this exact purpose, is stepping through, and I found that this load register, load an 8-bit byte out of a 16-bit bus, was failing. And so the way this code worked, this is the microcode stepper, and you run the switch to single step. This is the actual instruction to load a byte into a register when it's on the high side. And so what it does is it loads in 16 bits, and then it does a shift to the right 8 times to put it in the low byte, and then it goes into the register. And so that was broken. And it turns out that a 4-bit shifter was defective, and so it would shift just fine, but when it got to the last 4 bits, it was just stuck on. And so that 1 bit would stay on. So I replaced it, and lo and behold, now I could do line feeds. Okay, so that's great, making some progress. So back to the diagnostic, right? So load the diagnostics from the quintessential web page of the GT40, right? Looks good to me. What's rule number 1? Don't trust anybody, right? So I download the diagnostic. It still doesn't work. And I'm like, I cannot figure out what's going on. You know, it's like, what's going on? Well, lo and behold, the files on the website that are for diagnostic have a couple of extra characters that are not supposed to be there. And it's killing the download. Once the downloader sees that exclamation line feed, it aborts and it stops working. I'm like, you are kidding me. This is the site. And all of their diagnostics are broken that way. And so, you know, fortunately I discovered that. So I deleted that column you can see on the far right. And lo and behold, we've got working diagnostic. All right. So I don't know. There might be a video. Does it play? No, it doesn't. Okay. So now Lunar Lander is kind of working. And so Lunar Lander is running. So, hey, this is great. And so anyway, so now here's some slides from an emulator of basically more about the game. So you can see that it's tilted and has thrust. And then you eventually try to land. And if you do land on the moon, the guy comes out and puts a little a flag up. It says, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. I don't know if you can see it. It's really tiny. But this is the guy right here. He hasn't put his flag out yet. But, you know, he walks out. He's really tiny. And so, at any rate, so the game's working. Hey, this is fantastic. And but one of the things, I'm sure you guys know what an Easter egg, where a programmer puts their name in the game or something special, or puts some sort of ad or whatever. And so generally when you say Easter egg, well, what's the first Easter egg, right? The general consensus is Atari 2600 Adventure, right? If you've seen Ready Player One, you go and you get the invisible dot and you see the programmer's name. So that's a classic Easter egg, but it's not the first one. The first Easter egg actually is in Lunar Lander. And the first Easter egg is McDonald's. And it's even, he didn't really know, there weren't enough McDonald's around at the time. You know, I remember growing up on them, but he actually spells McDonald's instead of MC, it's like M-A-C Donald's or whatever. But he puts it in there, and you can actually land on the moon. And if you land next to this McDonald's, it'll say, I'll take 2 cheeseburgers and a Big Mac to go. I think that's what it says here. And this is me. This is actually my landing. I took a picture of it. It's kind of blurry, but it says, two cheeseburgers and a Big Mac to go. And then, unlike any other part of the game, which you normally just land and the game's over, it actually takes off at the end. And I don't have a picture. I should have taken a picture of it. But when I was getting the game ready for this show, a couple days before, I was flying it, you know, just to be able to land it. It takes, everybody probably can land it. It just takes you a number of tries to get the hang of it. But I ended up crashing into the McDonald's. And it printed out a line. It says, "You've destroyed the only McDonald's on the moon." So, yeah, and I'd never done that. And the game actually keeps track of all the carcasses. So it's very possible that if you were to try to land near McDonald's, that the McDonald's wouldn't be there because I destroyed it. Because it uses core memory, which is non-volatile, and so the game just keeps it. And it happened earlier today, the game crashed, and it was because it runs out of memory because it can't store any more of the carcasses of all the failed attempts. I don't have any video. You can see it at the show here. It is working. It's been really reliable. But if we go back to rule number 1, so I'm at VCF. I've got the Lunar Lander. In the day before, there's a setup for all the exhibitors to talk amongst themselves. So the GT40 is sitting at VCF in the exhibit room, running perfectly on Friday before the show. But in the evening, it gets kind of flaky and it just kind of stops working. And so I'm kind of freaking out going, I got this talk tomorrow and I don't have a working Lunar Lander, what's going to go? So I took it back to my friend's shop in Elk Grove Village and worked on it. It's working fine, you know? And so I bring it back on Saturday and in the morning and set it up and it starts running. And very quickly, it just stops and it's just acting all crazy and will not run. So anybody remember rule number 1? Yeah, so I had naively figured that, unlike California Extreme, where they do huge amounts of work to get the power distributed, it turned out the power in the wall had dropped to 88 volts. And, you know, your modern switcher will run down to 85, but these are linear regulators with big transformers. They're not going to run at all. And so, sure enough, fortunately, I drove out to Chicago with the Lunar Lander and my dog and the camping gear, and my girlfriend flew out later, but I had my little 2 kilowatt battery inverter that we camp off of. So I lugged that thing in there and plugged into it and then borrowed one of these resonant power converter. And between the two of those, I was able to power it even though I was losing the battle because it was drawing more energy than I could put. I could put in 400 watts in charging, but I was drawing out about 600 watts on a 2,000 watt battery. So I was losing, but I wasn't losing that fast. And so it made it through most of the show. But you know, it was a new kind of problem. And so obviously here, there's not as many people. And I was in the big metal room, which is all the big VAXs and the IBMs and all that stuff. And so, yeah, so it definitely worked. And so this show hasn't been a problem, although, oh yeah, there was a problem. So the game's running great, and then I went to Hackers. It was running great at Hackers, and then I get ready a couple days before this, and Tilt 5, who makes a great VR system out in Fremont, had a happy hour, and a bunch of people wanted to see it. So I brought the game in, and we played it for 30 minutes, and then all of a sudden, smoke just comes billowing out of the monitor, just like big clouds of smoke. And all these nerds in the room, you know what they're doing? They're not grounding the fire scene. They're going, you know, I don't think that's FR4. I think that's a resistor burning. You know, like, can somebody turn it off? You know, and but you know, that's the crowd we live in. You know, so yeah. So, but yeah, it's trying to distinguish between a resistor and a capacitor. And sure enough, it was a resistor. It wasn't FR4. And anyway, a capacitor had shorted, and it was a linear Zener diode regulator, and it just blew out that resistor, and it was glowing. And, I'm like, of course it's a week before I'm going to come here. I drove down from the Bay Area a week earlier because I was in San Diego. But, yeah, so I had to fix it. Fortunately, it was easy to fix. But I'm so glad it happened there rather than happening here. And, I'm filling the conference room with smoke. Those things can be a little temperamental. But it's been, knock on wood, and I'm very grateful that it's been running well. I hope you get a chance to play it. Yeah, and I'm going to probably go to VCF Texas next to show it until I return it, and then that'll be it. But yeah, so any questions? Happy to. Anyone? Bueller? Anyone?
You mentioned on the first slide that it had 8K. You said bytes. Is it?
It's 8K words. Yeah, 8K words. So 16K bytes. Yeah.
You have to say a core in the machine.
Yeah, it has core. Yeah. Core is non-volatile memory. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Oh, the chemical you used to get the screen back.
Yeah.
How did that go? Like you had to get all
Yeah, so it's a silicon digester. It doesn't, it's not, I guess it's pretty toxic stuff or whatever, but it doesn't hurt your hands. You can wash it off. I wear gloves, and I just used an injection needle and just, poked holes in the silicon and squirted it in there. And then I used an X-Acto knife to kind of scrape it out. And eventually you get enough of it eaten away that the ring, that metal ring that you have on CRTs will pop off. And then once it pops off, then you can separate the layers. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so about the McDonald's Easter eggs, that's really important.
Yeah.
Wait, how does it work? Is it like randomized? Is there like a chance for it to happen?
No, it's very specific. It's a specific location. And if you can get enough control, what you want to do is bring the lander down, and then once it gets close enough to the moon, it'll zoom into the surface of the moon. And then when you're at that, if you're slow enough, you can rotate the lander and fly left and right. And then you can go find it and then land where the McDonald's is. And then don't hit the McDonald's though.
And it's near the end of the fuel range?
You can run out of fuel if you don't land soon enough. Yeah, and if you're above the McDonald's, you run out of fuel, you're gonna kill the McDonald's. So, yeah, but if you do that, let me know and I can reload it. Because I don't know if it actually restored it. Yes.
Okay, question. As you're talking about this non-volatile for memory and how, especially like if you just turn McDonald's is gone, how do you reload? How do you reinitialize this non-volatile format?
Oh, good question. There's a small bootloader in the program which loads the diagnostics or whatever, and when you run that code, it gives you a blinking square cursor that makes it terminal mode. Like when you saw, this is a very good sign, that was in terminal mode. And then if you send, and it's in the file, but if you send like curly bracket L, that says go into loader mode, and then it has this kind of 3-byte text to binary conversion for the GT40 loader format that it loads, but you just load it over a serial port. So I take it from Terraterm and I say send file, and it just dumps the text file over the serial port to the Lunar Lander, and Lunar Lander takes all the text and converts it into binary and loads it into memory and then jumps to it.
But you're saying this is all based on the PDP-11, like on the very basic PDP-1101, PDP-1110.
Yes.
It's based on, right? So we're talking standard PDP-11 instruction set at this point, right?
It's PDP-11 instructions, yeah, but there's a bootloader, a ROM, a small, very small ROM that has 512 bytes, 256 words, that basically has some instructions that can allow you to send data over the serial port and get loaded into memory, and then it's a PDP-11 program running on that hardware.
How long was this adventure? And you got it?
I think I've had it for 6 months. Well, I've had it longer than that. Probably 3 to 6 months. I mean, I had it longer than that, but of course, being procrastinator, I waited till the month before the show to really get serious. But yes, sir.
I wasn't sure which parts of the whole device had tended to go out on you or burn out. Is the PDP-11 itself reasonably reliable over all these? So
I had some other bugs. So screen rot was the monitor, but once that was fixed, there was nothing done to it. It worked perfect. The problem was we replaced a PROM in the PDP-11. We placed a serial a 4-bit shift register in the PDP-11. And then the way they do the vector graphics is called binary rate multiplication. TI made some chips. And one of those or 2 of those went out bad, and that was in the vector generating module. So I had some weird artifacts where the game was playing just fine, but it was like diagonal lines instead of actual objects. So, but yeah, once you get a PDP-11, they're usually pretty reliable. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
On the video cards, are there unique chips, custom chips on that, or is it?
Nothing custom. It's all TTL. Some of the chips are hard to get, like those binary rate multipliers. You have to kind of look around to find them. But yeah, you can. You, sir?
I was in Texas at the arcade museum.
Yeah.
One of those.
I don't know. I haven't been there, but there are others that exist. You can go to the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California, and they have a GT40. It's not running. It's just.
Yeah, because Texas has one for video games back in the day.
Yeah.
Houston, yeah.
Yeah, it's more likely that they have the arcade version from Atari. That's still around. You can see those. It's easier, it's easier to fly and all that. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there existing software for the GT40?
There is. I'm not that familiar with it, but the idea behind the GT40 was that it would load some sort of graphic a utility library to draw lines and stuff like that. And then you have a bigger PDP-11 like 1145 or 1170 running Fortran, doing all kinds of numerical calculations for stuff and then displaying it on this terminal. But it was intended to really be a graphic display terminal. Yeah. Yeah.
So does this make this like the first video game?
I think the first video game was Space War, right, on the PDP-1 in '69, something like that. But this probably was the second graphic video game. I mean, there was text-based, but I think this is probably the second graphic video game, and the first Easter egg in a video game. So, all right. Well, I'll be at the show in my booth. Feel free to come by and play the game. You're welcome to play it. It should be running. But I am leaving today at 6 p.m. I will not be here tomorrow. So if you want to play it, you got to play it today because I'm heading to the East Coast. So anyway, thank you all.